14 Medicaid programs are now under audit. What they found could change everything.
5:47 a.m. Minneapolis, Minnesota, December 30th, 2025. Federal agents moved through the frozen streets of the Twin Cities with precision. Ice clung to windshields. Breath fogged in the air. This was not a routine inspection. This was the beginning of the largest fraud investigation in Minnesota history. Over 2,000 federal officers from Homeland Security Investigations, ICE, and the FBI descended on the city. Their targets: daycare centers, housing agencies, food distribution sites. The scale was staggering. $9 billion. That number would echo through congressional chambers, across social media platforms, into living rooms nationwide. $9 billion stolen from American taxpayers through a web of fraudulent claims spanning more than a dozen public assistance programs. But this story did not begin in December. It began years earlier, in non-profit offices, in empty buildings claiming to feed thousands of children, in bank accounts swelling with federal funds while no child ever received a meal. What federal prosecutors would uncover was not isolated fraud. It was systematic theft. It was organized crime dressed in the language of public service. Let me show you. Hit like so this story reaches more people who need to understand what happened in Minnesota. The fraud started with food. A program called Feeding Our Future promised to nourish vulnerable children during the COVID-19 pandemic. Federal Child Nutrition Program funds flowed into Minnesota through this nonprofit. The money was meant for schools, child care centers, community programs serving meals to kids who needed them most. Instead, it funded luxury vehicles. It purchased property overseas. It filled the pockets of individuals who had no intention of feeding anyone. By March 2025, a federal jury convicted Amy Bach, the founder of Feeding Our Future, on all fraud charges. Her co-defendant, Salim Ahmed Said, was also found guilty on 21 counts including wire fraud, bribery, and money laundering. The amount stolen through their operation, $250 million. Not thousands, not millions in the single digits. $250 million meant for hungry children. Throughout the scheme, Feeding Our Future fraudulently obtained and dispersed more than $240 million in federal funds. Prosecutors presented evidence of fake meal count sheets, invoices for food never purchased, restaurants that existed only on paper, administrative fees collected on phantom distributions, kickbacks paid to site operators who submitted false claims. The numbers were staggering in their precision. One defendant, Mukhtar Mohammed Sharif, was convicted and sentenced to 17 years in federal prison. He created fraudulent meal count sheets documenting children and meals that never existed. Another defendant operated a grocery store that claimed $4.1 million through Feeding Our Future. The store paid kickbacks to conspirators who helped manufacture the illusion of legitimate service. To date, 78 defendants have been charged in the Feeding Our Future case alone. 62 have been convicted. Sentences have ranged from probation to nearly 2 decades in federal prison. But Feeding Our Future was only the beginning. Comment exposed if you believe this investigation needed to happen sooner. While prosecutors built cases against Feeding Our Future conspirators, another fraud network operated in plain sight. The Housing Stabilization Services Program was designed to help seniors and people with disabilities find safe housing. It was run through Minnesota's Medicaid system. The program intentionally maintained low barriers to entry, few record-keeping requirements, minimal oversight. Prosecutors would later describe it as a program designed to be exploited. And exploited it was. In summer 2025, Minnesota officials shut down the entire Housing Stabilization Services program after discovering large-scale fraud. Federal prosecutors charged 13 defendants with defrauding the system by enrolling as providers and submitting millions in fake and inflated bills. Among those charged were 2 individuals from Pennsylvania with no clear connection to Minnesota. They traveled to the state in what prosecutors called fraud tourism. They set up fake provider credentials, submitted false claims, collected $750,000, then left. One defendant, Asha Farhan Hassan, was charged in both the Feeding Our Future scheme and the housing fraud. She pleaded guilty to wire fraud in December 2025. The housing program had been projected to cost approximately $2.6 million annually. Instead, spending ballooned to over $100 million in a single year. The vast majority was fraudulent. Services never rendered. Clients never helped. Money simply transferred from federal accounts into private pockets. But the corruption extended further. Minnesota operates 14 Medicaid-funded services designated as high risk for fraud. One is an autism services program designed to help children with developmental needs. Federal prosecutors charged 2 defendants with hiring unqualified behavioral technicians who never actually worked with children enrolled in the program. The defendants submitted false claims indicating services had been provided. They paid kickbacks to parents who agreed to enroll their children. Some families received as much as $1,500 to participate in the fraud. No therapy was delivered. No children were helped. The program existed solely to generate fraudulent billing. First Assistant U.S. Attorney Joseph H. Thompson stated clearly, "This is not an isolated scheme. 14 Medicaid services are now under audit, all deemed high risk for fraud. The total amount potentially stolen across these programs, $9 billion. Type yes if you think those responsible should face maximum sentences." In late December 2025, a viral video changed everything. YouTuber Nick Shirley posted a 40-minute investigation of daycare centers in Minneapolis. He visited facilities that were receiving federal child care funding. Location after location appeared empty. No children present. No staff visible. Doors locked. Windows dark. Shirley's video accumulated tens of millions of views within days. Elon Musk amplified it. Vice President J.D. Vance shared it. Attorney General Pam Bondi referenced it. The national spotlight turned to Minnesota. On December 30th, the Department of Homeland Security deployed federal agents to Minneapolis in what ICE called the largest DHS operation ever conducted. Over 2,000 federal officers flooded the Twin Cities area. Their mission: investigate allegations of fraud, human smuggling, and unlawful employment practices. HSI agents went door to door. They conducted compliance checks at child care facilities. They executed search warrants. They reviewed financial records. By January 6, 2026, ICE had arrested 150 individuals. By mid-January, that number exceeded 500. Many had prior deportation orders. Others were connected to ongoing fraud investigations. Some faced criminal charges unrelated to the fraud schemes. Minnesota's Office of Inspector General conducted on-site compliance checks at 9 daycare centers featured in Shirley's video. They found 8 operating as expected with children present. 1 had not yet opened when inspected. State licensing records showed all but 2 had active licenses. Most had been inspected by state regulators within 6 months. Dozens of citations existed for safety issues, cleanliness concerns, equipment violations, and staff training deficiencies, but no recorded evidence of fraud. One daycare provided security footage showing parents dropping off children the same day Shirley filmed an empty building. The timing suggested the facility had not yet opened for the day when Shirley arrived. Federal investigators told CBS News that child care fraud was only vaguely a priority. The real focus: the 14 high-risk Medicaid programs, housing, nutrition, behavioral health, autism services, programs where oversight was minimal and fraudulent claims flowed unchecked for years. The Trump administration froze $185 million in federal child care funding to Minnesota. President Trump called Minnesota a hub of fraudulent money laundering activity. He ended temporary deportation protections for Somali immigrants, claiming without evidence that Somali gangs were terrorizing the state. The Department of Health and Human Services announced sweeping changes requiring all states to provide justification, receipts, or photo evidence before federal child care funds would be released. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz faced intense scrutiny. Critics accused his administration of ignoring warning signs, of silencing whistleblowers, of prioritizing political considerations over program integrity. On January 5, 2026, Walz announced he would not seek a third term as governor. Republican Representative James Comer, chairman of the House Oversight Committee, launched a formal investigation. He scheduled hearings with testimony from Walz and other state officials. The question before Congress: how did this happen? How did nearly $10 billion in fraudulent claims pass through Minnesota systems undetected? Comment accountability if you think state officials must answer for this failure. The defendants in these fraud schemes did not hide their wealth. Court documents revealed luxury purchases: a 2013 Porsche, vacation properties in Kenya, homes in Turkey, expensive travel to Dubai, China, and East Africa. One defendant forfeited $5.2 million, including $3.7 million from bank accounts and luxury goods seized from her residence. Money wired overseas created investigative black holes. Millions transferred to accounts in China where tracking recipients becomes nearly impossible. Nearly $3 million moved to Kenyan banks. The Treasury Department opened an investigation into whether stolen funds reached Al-Shabaab, an Al-Qaeda affiliate designated as a foreign terrorist organization by the United States. Multiple federal investigators told CBS News they found no evidence that taxpayer dollars were directly funneled to Al-Shabaab. Former U.S. Attorney Andy Lugar, who led the Feeding Our Future prosecution, stated the vast majority of stolen money went to luxury purchases for the defendants themselves. Not terrorism, greed. As of January 2026, federal prosecutors have charged 98 defendants in Minnesota fraud-related cases. 85 are of Somali descent. This fact has become a flashpoint. President Trump and Republican lawmakers have focused attention on Minnesota's Somali community. Trump called Somali immigrants garbage who contribute nothing. He claimed they are terrorizing Minnesota. Local officials, including former Governor Walz, denounced the rhetoric as vile, racist lies, and slander. They argued the fraud cases involve specific individuals who committed crimes, not an entire community. Civil rights advocates warned against collective blame. They pointed to thousands of Somali Americans who are law-abiding citizens contributing to Minnesota's economy and culture. The tension escalated. Protests erupted. Federal agents conducting enforcement operations near schools and daycares drew criticism. On January 14, 2026, a federal officer shot and killed Renee Nicole Good during an enforcement action. Details remained unclear. Witnesses provided conflicting accounts. The incident inflamed existing tensions. Community leaders demanded accountability. Federal officials defended the operation. The clash between federal authority and state autonomy intensified. Minnesota is not alone in facing fraud within public assistance programs. But the scale here is unprecedented. $9 billion represents one of the largest fraud scandals in American history. It dwarfs corporate scandals. It exceeds the GDP of small nations. And it happened not through sophisticated cybercrime or international hacking networks. It happened through simple exploitation of programs designed to help the vulnerable. Fake invoices, false claims, phantom clients, empty buildings collecting federal funds. Share this video so more Americans understand the depth of this corruption. The deeper question remains, how did oversight fail so completely? Minnesota's Department of Human Services maintained responsibility for monitoring these programs. State auditors reviewed spending. Federal agencies provided funding with the expectation of state accountability. Yet for years, fraudulent claims flowed through the system. Warning signs were ignored. Whistleblowers faced resistance. When Minnesota officials questioned Feeding Our Future's suspicious claims and slowed reimbursements, the nonprofit sued the state for racial discrimination. The lawsuit created pressure. State officials backed down. The fraud continued. A state auditor's report found that the threat of legal consequences and negative media attention affected the state's decision-making process about regulatory action against Feeding Our Future. Fear of accusations paralyzed enforcement. In October 2025, Governor Walz ordered a third-party audit of Medicaid billing at the Department of Human Services. The audit identified 14 Medicaid services as high risk based on programmatic vulnerabilities and evidence of fraudulent activity. The state implemented prepayment reviews. They disenrolled approximately 800 inactive providers. They paused licenses for new home and community-based services. They terminated the Housing Stabilization Program entirely. But these actions came late. After $250 million stolen through Feeding Our Future. After $100 million lost to housing fraud. After billions in fraudulent claims across autism services, behavioral health programs, and other Medicaid-funded assistance. The question Minnesota taxpayers now ask, where was this oversight 5 years ago? Where were these safeguards when the schemes began? Who benefited from the delay? And who will be held accountable? Federal trials continue. Sentencing hearings proceed. Asset forfeiture orders strip convicted defendants of luxury vehicles and overseas properties. But the money is gone. $9 billion cannot be recovered. Federal funds meant for hungry children, seniors needing housing, kids with autism requiring therapy, stolen. And the programs themselves now face restrictions. Legitimate providers struggle under new compliance requirements. Families who depend on these services face uncertainty as funding freezes and investigations expand. This is the cost of fraud. Not just stolen dollars. Broken trust. Damaged institutions. Communities divided. And the most vulnerable among us left without the services promised to them. If this investigation revealed the depth of corruption hiding in plain sight, comment justice below. The Feeding Our Future mastermind awaits sentencing. So do dozens of co-conspirators. Federal prosecutors recommend decades in prison for those convicted of orchestrating the schemes. But prison sentences cannot undo the damage. They cannot restore the trust Americans once had in public assistance programs. They cannot erase the stain on Minnesota's reputation. And they cannot answer the question that haunts every taxpayer watching this unfold. If it happened here on this scale, where else is it happening? What other programs are being exploited right now? What other networks are operating in the shadows, submitting false claims, creating phantom services, stealing billions while oversight sleeps? This story is not over. Federal agents remain in Minneapolis. Investigations continue across the 14 high-risk Medicaid programs. More indictments are expected. More trials will follow. More sentences will be handed down. But the fundamental question remains unanswered. How do we prevent this from happening again? How do we build systems that help those in need without creating opportunities for systematic theft? How do we balance access with accountability? How do we protect vulnerable populations while ensuring taxpayer dollars reach their intended recipients? Minnesota became ground zero for a fraud scandal that exposed the fragility of America's social safety net. The ease with which bad actors exploited programs designed to serve children, seniors, people with disabilities, it should alarm every American. It should spark reform. It should demand accountability not just from those who stole, but from those who failed to prevent the theft. The fight continues. In courtrooms, in congressional hearings, in state capitals where lawmakers must decide how to rebuild systems that were systematically corrupted. The stakes are measured not just in dollars, but in trust. In the belief that government can serve the people without becoming a mechanism for theft. In the promise that when we dedicate resources to the most vulnerable, those resources will actually reach them. Hit like if you believe this investigation matters. Comment your thoughts on how we prevent this from happening elsewhere. Subscribe to stay informed as this story develops. Because this is only the beginning. The fraud touched billions. The consequences will echo for years. And the questions it raises about oversight, accountability, and trust in American institutions demand answers we have not yet found. The battle for justice in Minnesota continues. And the rest of America watches, wondering if their states are next.